Words of our Divine Mother. Our Divine Mother says, at every moment, all the unforeseen, the unexpected, the unknown is before us, and what happens to us depends mostly on the intensity and purity of our faith. With my love and blessings, says our Divine Mother. Words of our Divine Mother from the collective works of our Divine Mother, Volume 8, Question and Answers, date 20th June 1956, page 188. Question, sweet mother. Here Sri Aurobindo writes, and yet there is in the heart or behind it a profound mystic light, in the book Synthesis of Yoga on page 140. What is this mystic light? For this our Divine Mother says, it is love. For this the child says, but after that, our Lord Sri Aurobindo continues to say, which is not what we call intuition, for that, though not of the mind, yet descends through the mind, has yet a direct touch upon truth, and is nearer to the divine than the human intellect in its pride of knowledge. Is there a relationship between this mystic light and intuition, sweet mother? For this our Divine Mother says, it is not intuition. It is knowledge through love, light through love, understanding through love. Sri Aurobindo says that it is not intuition, for intuition belongs to the intellect, at least in its expression. The expression of intuition is intellectual, while this is a kind of direct knowledge, almost by identity, which comes from love. And the child says, sweet mother, and the inner oracle? For this, our Divine Mother says, the oracle, that is the power of divination, of foresight, of understanding symbols, and that is in the psychic being. Prophets, for example, do not prophesy with the mind. It is through a direct contact beyond emotions and sentiments. Sri Aurobindo even says that Vedas particularly were not written with the mind and through the head. The form of the hymn welled up spontaneously from the psychic being along with the words. For this the child says, sweet mother, if someone has the psychic contact, does that mean that he has this power? For this our Divine Mother says, more or less yes. The more perfect the contact, the greater the power. It also depends on the outer possibilities of the being. But I have already explained this to you several times. I've already told you that when one enters into contact with one's psychic, certain faculties develop spontaneously. For instance, there are people with no intellectual education who suddenly get quite a remarkable power of expression, which comes in this way spontaneously through the inner contact with the psychic being. For this, the child says, sweet mother, Sri Aurobindo speaks here of secular refrigeration. For this, our Divine Mother says, what? The child says, he writes, it is indeed by the religio-ethical sense that the laws of universal goodwill or universal compassion of love and service to the neighbor, the Vedantic, the Buddhist, the Christian ideal was created only by a sort of a secular refrigeration extinguishing the fervor of religious element in it. Could the humanitarian ideal disengage itself and become the highest plane of a secular system of mental and moral ethics? For this, our Divine Mother says, yes, this is the materialistic and purely physical thought which freezes and congeals the emotions, takes away all the warmth of the soul, all the fervor, and all the order of the feelings and religious consciousness, and makes you coldly responsible and reasonable, and makes you coldly reasonable. For this, the child says, sweet mother, if the heart can be the means of a direct knowledge, what is the role of the intellectual as an intermediary of knowledge? For this, our Divine Mother says, intermediary? For the true role of the mind is the formation and organization of action. The mind has a formative and organizing power, and it is that which puts the different elements of inspiration in order for action, for organizing action. And if it would only confine itself to that role, receiving inspirations, whether from above or from the mystic center of the soul, and simply formulating the plan of action in the broad outline or in a minute detail for the smallest things of life or greater terrestrial organizations, it would amply fulfill its function. It is not an instrument of knowledge, but it can use knowledge for action to organize action. It is an instrument of organization and formation, very powerful and very capable when it is well developed. One can feel this very clearly when one wants to organize one's life, for instance, to put the different elements in their place in one's existence. There is a certain intellectual faculty which immediately puts each thing in its place and makes a plan and organize. And it is not a knowledge that comes from the mind. It is a knowledge which comes, as I said, from the mystic depths of the soul, from a higher consciousness. And the mind concentrates in the physical world and organizes it to give a basis of action to the higher consciousness. Our Divine Mother says, one has this experience very clearly when one wants to organize one's life, for instance, to put the different elements in their place in one's existence. There is a certain intellectual faculty which immediately puts each thing in its place and makes a plan and organizes. And it is not a knowledge that comes from the mind. It is a knowledge which comes, as I said, from the mystic depths of the soul or from a higher consciousness. And the mind concentrates it in the physical world and organizes it to give a basis of action to the higher consciousness. One has this experience very clearly when one wants to organize one's life. Then there is another use. When one is in contact with one's reason, with the rational center of the intellect, the pure reason, it is a powerful control over all vital impulses. All that comes from the vital world can be very firmly controlled by it and used in a disciplined and organized action. But it must be at the service of something else, not working for its own satisfaction. These are the two uses of the mind. It is a controlling force, an instrument of control, a power of organization. That is its true place. Question, sweet mother. Can one realize the divine through love alone? For this, our divine mother says, yes, my child, certainly. It is even most the direct way. One can realize the divine, that is, identify oneself with the divine, become fully conscious of the divine, and be an instrument of the divine. But naturally, one does not realize the integral yoga, for it is only along one line. But from the viewpoint of identification with the divine, it is even more the difficult or the direct path. But without mental development, one won't be able to express the divine, sweet mother, says the child. For this, our divine mother says, one cannot express him intellectually, but one can express him in action, one can express him in feelings, and express him in life. There is a silence. Question, sweet mother. Sometimes when one feels depressed, it lasts long for a longer time, but when one feels a special kind of a joy, it does not last. For this, our divine mother says, yes, that is very true. The child says, then what should one do to make it last longer? For this, our divine mother says, but it is not the same part of the being that has the depression and the joy. If you are speaking of pleasure, the pleasure of the vital is something very fleeting. And I think that in life as it is at present, there are many occasions for displeasure than for pleasure. Pleasure in itself is extremely fleeting, for if the same vibration of pleasure is prolonged a little, it becomes unpleasant or even repulsive. Exactly the same vibration. Pleasure in itself is something very fugitive. But if you are speaking of joy, it is something altogether different. It is a kind of a warmth and illumination in the heart, you see. One may feel joy in the mind. It is a kind of warmth and beatific illuminating occurring somewhere. That is the quality which is not yet fully developed. One is rarely in the psychological state that needed to have it. And it is why it is fugitive. Otherwise, joy is constantly there in the truth of the being, in the reality of the being, in true self with pleasure. It is a kind of inner delight. But one is rarely in a state to feel it unless one has been fully conscious of one's psychic being. That is why, when it comes, it is fugitive. For the psychological condition necessary to perceive it, it is not often there. On the other hand, one is almost constantly in an ordinary state, a vital state, where the least unpleasant thing very spontaneously and easily brings you depression. Depression, if you are in a very weak position, if you are a weak person, revolt, if you are a strong. Every desire, says our Divine Mother, every desire which is not satisfied, every impulse which meets an obstacle, every unpleasant contact with outside things, very easily, very spontaneously creates depression or revolt, for that is the normal state of things, normal in life as it is today, while joy is an exceptional state. And so, pleasure which is simply a pleasing sensation, if it lasts, not only does it lose its edge, but ends up being unpleasant. One cannot bear it anymore. So, quite naturally, it comes and goes. That is to say, the very thing that gives you pleasure, exactly the same vibration, after a short while, does not give it to you any longer. And if it persists, it becomes unpleasant for you. That is why you can't have pleasure for a longer time. The only thing which can be lasting is joy. if one tries to enter into contact with the truth of the being which holds this joy permanently, says our Divine Mother.